town and are not welcomed, go into its streets and say,
even the dust of your town we wipe from our feet as a warning to you.
Yet be sure of this, the kingdom of God has come near. Whoever listens to you listens to me. Whoever rejects you rejects me. But whoever rejects me rejects him who sent me.
The 72 returned with joy and said, Lord, even the demons submit to us in your name.
He replied, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven.
I have given you authority to trample on snakes and scorpions, and to overcome all the power of the enemy. Nothing will harm you.
However, do not rejoice that the spirits submit to you, but rejoice that your names are written in heaven. Speaking of pain, yes, that was painful. It was not the video I was expecting. We're talking about, in these verses, the sending of the 70 or the 72. And we notice particular instructions that are given to the evangelists that they are to go about to heal people of their diseases. And there has been actually quite a stir about the use of this term disease as it has been used to describe alcoholism or drug addiction as a medical condition or a disease. Some who have been in recovery have described it as a disease that only God could heal. And so people have given credit to God for healing them of their alcohol and drug problems. Others have been suspected of using that term disease as an excuse to just keep on drinking or using. Still others might tell us that when they hear that word disease and they're being taught in their counseling that what you have is a chemical disease and you need to recover from your disease, it kind of shuts them down and makes them feel overwhelmed just because of the way that word disease hits them. And so I have even become more cautious in the way I use the word disease. And sure enough, I have invited clients to share their thoughts about that word disease, and I notice different people have different interpretations, and for some, it is not helpful to insist that what they have is a disease. The word addiction might be a little more easily accepted. So, however we might describe the healing, I would simply invite all of us to imagine God coming and calling out the 70 today, here in Davies County, or the 72 as it says. Imagine God calling 70 people from various congregations to go door to door throughout our neighborhoods, declaring that God's power is available to liberate people from alcohol and drug problems and other kinds of snares in this life. Imagine 72 people going and knocking on doors, pronouncing that God's kingdom is very near. That you don't have to wait until after you die to be fully healed, but God's kingdom is alive today. And of course, the emphasis here in these verses is for the disciples to realize, as they are given authority, Christ commissions them with authority to go out and proclaim the message. And when they notice the power at work in them to conquer the demons, they are not to rejoice that they have power over those spirits, but rejoice that their names are written in heaven, as the scripture says. But imagine us proclaiming the power of God to deliver us from various life-controlling issues. For some, it might mean freedom from the power of food, It might mean freedom from the power of markets that consume our resources. It might be freedom from manipulation by others, or freedom from things like lust, the lure of the internet, or the gossip net, or unhealthy relationships, or even things like human trafficking, which we might be shocked to know is a reality, even in southwestern Indiana. But imagine people being called and commissioned by Christ today to preach not only the forgiveness of sins, but the real power of God's deliverance from various forces in our present world. The idea here is the prospect of God's concern for millions of people who are suffering in some ways, people who are affected by other people's behaviors in their own homes. And so millions are battling some form of life-controlling issue. We could add workaholism, perfectionism, people-pleasingism, rageaholism, sexaholism, shopaholism, communism, whatever else. But God is here to deliver. And Christ sends the disciples out, these 72, to proclaim God's kingdom being very near, God's power to deliver, and that being a message that in some cases was met with fierce resistance. There might even be a call in our neighborhoods today for freedom from some kind of condemnation that people suffer. It could be condemnation regarding their past, or condemnation for apparent weaknesses, or even condemnation by people's own expectations of themselves, but some kind of condemnation. And imagine the Lord calling us on a mission to proclaim freedom from all of this condemnation, and for people to know that God delivers as God's kingdom is near and God's promises are sure. In Luke's Gospel, Jesus commissions these disciples to proclaim the nearness of God's kingdom. We can believe that God's kingdom is in our own midst. We might not have to know exactly what to call it. So if God is working, and if it be called healing or whatever, we can let the Spirit say what that is. We can let people say for themselves what they believe God is doing for them. We can even share our own testimonies. We can share our experiences of God's intervention in our lives. We can talk about things that might reveal some vulnerabilities, and yet have the confidence to share because we know that Christ is truly alive with us, that the resurrection power of Christ is just as real today as it was 2,000 years ago. And so we can allow God to be at work in us. We are not saved by our own works, but salvation does make us available for God to work through us. I will repeat this need for a new dialogue, as I often say it. We might need God's deliverance from various fears that prevent us from having more responsible dialogue. There can be the fear of conflict, the fear of confrontation, the fear of being misunderstood, the fear of rejection, and other fears, and for various reasons, we don't really enter into the dialogue to which Christ calls us. We don't get very deep in it because of some kind of fear or discomfort. But we have these various fears that maybe God is expecting something of us that will be a little bit too much, or that if we have too much discussion, we will discover more of a need, and a call to do things beyond what we would care to do. But we do need more dialogue. And the greatest challenge of this dialogue might even be the level of honesty that always needs to go deeper. In some cases, we might give each other honest feedback, and that feedback might be a little bit unpleasant. I think I've maybe picked up a little bit of feedback as I watched myself on that video. I can understand how difficult it might be to hear my lack of enunciation as I can see it. But others might give me feedback about my decisions. For example, that I was the interim pastor and that I was not selected to be the permanent pastor even though I had applied, and yet I hung around. Some might look at me and say, well, you mean they rejected you? They pulled that lever, the trap door open, and you went down the chute, but then you crawl right back up and say, oh, I want to be here. Now, I don't remember it being like that, but some might be critical of the way I have been here in ministry. Others might point out that here I was the board chair in 2018, and I should have had my chance to let Pastor John know that when he's in my board meeting that I'm the boss in this meeting, but did I do that, or did I just say, oh, it's so nice to have Pastor John? Is Dan just kind of a kiss up or something like that? And so some might give me that feedback or interpret my approach to ministry like that. Another possibility would be that to say that, oh, so you talked to Pastor John, when you met him, you discovered that both of you were doing some similar things in ministry, both working with people in work release and both working in addiction recovery ministries. And so I suppose you just assume that must be God bringing the two of you together so that you could be together in ministry here. And so I suppose we're all just supposed to do whatever John and Daniel decide because they're the clergy and God tells them what to do. And I would hope that if anybody makes that feedback, that we would all know, I don't believe that. I would really believe that God is making his purpose known to all of us in the body of Christ. That we are all to be listening, to be hearing what Christ wants us to do. We are needing to share what we hear God saying to us. And so, it's important for us to hear God's calling. The video that I had intended for you to see, and I could have sworn Alan and Sally knew that's what we were watching, but you can look it up on YouTube by simply typing in Rat Park Experiment. And my point was going to be that I'm not expecting you to believe or to let that video change your mind. It's about 3 minutes. But simply to listen to the ideas. As it talks about the way opiates have been used in our society. It talks about the way that people become addicted. But when they did the Rat Park Experiment, the same rats who became very quickly addicted to a drug that was offered, when they simply had more options in the rat park, they actually didn't choose the drug anymore. And those rats were able to become more free from addiction, which is to ask the question, why can't human beings have better options? Why do we have to stop assuming and incarcerating and controlling and punishing people with alcohol and drug problems when it might be that what they really need are the better options that people would in fact choose, and it might have more to do with relationships among us. Now what the author of that video is saying, his name is Johann Hari, he has said that the opposite of addiction is connection. And so it challenges us to think about the importance of connections, that perhaps there are important connections that anybody can recognize and understand how important those connections are for people who have particular struggles. And I would even suggest that we could understand recovery in a more biblical sense. I have not planned to say much about that today, but I would tell you that I see addiction as a kind of walking in the light. There's a recovery slogan that says we are as sick as our secrets. And I really believe that we're called to come to the light, to be more honest, be more accountable. Because in many ways, we are missing some fulfillment because of fears that lead us in various ways to hide and to miss some of the good things. And so the same redemption that brings one out of the alcoholism, the drug addiction, can bring another from other sins. I see no reason for there to be one Jesus who deals with the chemically addicted and a different Jesus for all the rest of us. No, I believe we have one Lord. We're called to one faith. There's one Holy Spirit at work in us. And yes, God's Spirit does work in different ways in us. And each of us has different gifts. And you might notice that when it comes to understanding our spiritual gifts, this has been one of the greatest challenges for many congregations in our society. But it does make sense that it flows. We will know our spiritual gifts from dialogue that we have with each other, from being more open with each other, from having stronger and healthier connections. And I would even suggest that one of the biggest problems in our society and even in our churches is the issue of silence. I have learned how silence can be a tactic that people in their criminal activities actually use to protect themselves. And to get arrested, they have the right to remain silent, as we all know. And that's been dramatized for us. But silence can be very manipulative. People can use silence to refuse to give an answer that they just do not want to share. Information is power. And so silence can be very powerful when I'm withholding that information. And silence can even be a factor in our churches. You might think of a time when you broke a silence that had come upon some people where you were. And you might recall that breaking that silence was very difficult to do and maybe even very awkward after doing it. Well, I truly believe that Christ does call us to break the silence. The very life of Jesus himself was a life that came and disrupted darkness and broke silence. And the body of Christ lived in a world whose silence must be broken. Because much of the problem with these various addictions continues to develop in a cover of darkness, in a cloud of silence. Now, Americans have a lot of people who can break silence. We often call them celebrities. We have celebrities, Christian and non-Christian, who are very good at breaking silence. A celebrity has a way of getting our attention, and we're all looking. We can even have it on our phones and show our phone to somebody else, and it's a meme or some presentation that just holds us spellbound. And so there are various ways of breaking silence, and yet those who can break that silence often do it to their own glory. They reveal themselves as the ones who can break the silence. So how might we break the silence to the glory of God? As I believe the silence is to be broken. We live in a world where people can break the silence to their own glory, while the call of Jesus Christ to us is to break the silence for the glory of God alone. And not only is Christ worthy to break that silence, but as Christ calls and commissions the disciples, Christ puts Christ's own authority in them. Christ gives authority to us so that Christ's true authority is truly at work in us today, so that even the world can recognize it and know the Lord's authority is real. And Christ's authority is available in us today to break this very God-awful silence around this matter of addiction and other life-controlling issues. We're called to live by faith, by the authority of Christ, who is at work in us, to God who is faithful in his calling to us, to God who fulfills God's promise in us. And we're called to allow Christ's authority to be in us and work in us to the glory of God.